Tracking habits is actually easy. If that was the secret, we would all have perfect routines by now. I'll show you how to design a system designed for one thing: frictionless execution. You'll see exactly what separates a system that works from every other generic habit tracker. And by the end of this video, you'll have a clear 3-step process for optimizing all of your habits. Let's dive in.
So we're in my Notion system. This is the daily cycle, the day I'm having right now. Let me just scroll down to the execution section. This is the place that I live in day to day most of the time, but also this is the place that's really going to demonstrate all the optimizations that we're going to discuss in this video. This whole 3-step habit system that I mentioned in the intro is nothing new. It's been popularized by people like Charles Duhigg in his book, The Power of Habit, and James Clear in the book Atomic Habits. This system, of course, is the cue, routine, reward, habit cycle. Cue is something that triggers the execution of a habit. The routine itself is the execution and anything that helps you facilitate that execution. And reward is something that you get right after execution. What I would like to discuss in this video is specifically how do you operationalize it? Like, how do you take that system and apply it to your Notion Life OS? The goal is that every single routine that we add into our lives is analyzed and optimized in those 3 dimensions. Because the internet, of course, is full of great advice, but it mostly ends up being just ideas that we collect and never use. We want to have a system that turns this personal development advice into actual repeatable execution. Otherwise, we're just kind of watching productivity porn. Okay, let's just get into the cue part right away. The habit advice you would read in books would be usually around environment management, and how it relates to cues, it would be something like, if you want to run in the morning, you put your running shoes in the middle of the room, so you like trip over them or something like that. Now, that's great to a degree, but first of all, that's completely not scalable. Like, you're not going to really build a system around it. And second of all, it's all in your physical environment. And to a large degree, we live digitally now. This is the whole point with this Notion Life OS, is that you have a digital system that you live inside of. And then you can engineer the cues and rewards and facilitate the execution of routines in a completely different way. And that's awesome. So fundamentally, what you want is a cue to consistently lead you to an action. If it doesn't, it's not a cue. In my Notion system, there are 5 types of cues that I found really helpful, and this is what I want to talk about right now. We're going to be starting with this idea of a masterpiece day structure. Notice that there is a correlation between the macro buttons here, these are Notion's macro buttons, and the actions that I have created here below. There is a day launch button and a day launch action, morning routine, first meal, first block, etc. Every single day is assembled by these macro buttons. Why am I even mentioning them in the cue part? Like, how are they a trigger? The reason they're a trigger is because you get in the habit of starting each day with day launch. And then, since they're arranged in a sequence, once you're done with the specific sequence of actions inside of day launch, your mind naturally goes, okay, what's next? And then you simply look at the next macro button, and this is your natural answer. That's the next step. There is no ambiguity, and there is no need to think about it. It cues your execution of the next block. With time, you are going to find out what are the ideal building blocks for a good day, and then you simply create macro buttons to encapsulate those. Now, bookend routines, meaning your early morning routines and your evening routines, are probably going to be more well defined, but in the middle you're going to have some work blocks and maybe something that you have less control over. But this is why you have container blocks that still give you a sense of an overarching structure that breaks down your day into specific blocks without dictating too much of the details of execution. So maybe my morning routine is very well defined in a step-by-step sort of way, but something like first block is just a container for a work session that I can put anything inside. The macro buttons here are also connected to the checkboxes. So the checkboxes represent the individual routines of my day. For example, if we look into my day launch, let's just look into it. It's got a few routines in there, and you will notice that they correspond to the checkboxes. And when I hit the button, it also checks the checkboxes. And this is true for a lot of buttons. And of course, what's very awesome with these buttons is if you want to play around with your daily structure, you can very easily just drag them around to, let's say, have your first block before your morning routine, and then try that for a couple of weeks or whatever. Then with time, you just settle on this ideal structure that will probably be more or less stable for a long period of time. Another cool thing is that these buttons, they can be structured this way for one type of day, and then you can have another type of day which would create a different template for the daily cycle, and you can have a completely different structure. You can see I have several types of days, like execution day, which is the day I'm having today, but then I also have a few other days. For those days, I would have a different masterpiece day structure, which is perfect because your recovery day structure is different than your execution day structure, which is, again, something you're definitely not seeing in typical habit trackers. The key insight here is that you want to be assembling your day instead of rebuilding it from scratch. You come up with a structure that you know repeatedly works, and then you assemble it in just a few clicks. This was a long first type of cue, which is the masterpiece day macro buttons. These describe your ideal flow of the day, and it hints you at what's next. It makes it much less about discipline. You can think of discipline as being able to remember what you should do next, but structure is making it obvious and easy to start. So your environment shapes your habits, and this is your digital environment. Your digital workspace is the structure of your environment. While this structure is flexible and will change and should be easy to change, the reality is that once you define your ideal masterpiece day, it tends to stick around for a long time. And that's kind of the point. The point is you build once and you execute forever. This structure that you define should become the engine that drives your best days. Okay, so let's move to the second point. We've talked about the masterpiece day structure. Now let's talk about the flow of checkboxes, the stuff that we see here. To a certain degree, it's similar because these are also ordered sequentially. But first of all, they provide a little more detail. So instead of an overarching morning routine button, these are slightly more broken down. But also, they differ in approaches and in the way they queue execution. So this is why this is a separate step and separate queue. Obviously, you are familiar with habit checkboxes. This is something that's very common to habit trackers. But what you often see is that they're kind of arranged randomly, or at least they're not used to drive execution or to queue the next action, which is what is different with the checkbox flow that you see here on the left. The thing is that checkboxes only trigger action when they exist in this well-defined and deliberate sequence. If you have just a bunch of checkboxes, usually people use it only at the end of the day, but that's not using it to queue execution. That is just a tracking device. In this case, since they're arranged in a sequence, it very much queues the execution. You can see like I have a specific flow of checkboxes that I already have checked. I'm in my second half of the day and I'm going to be wrapping up my work fairly soon, and I can immediately see what's the next habit. Like in this case is just me stopping working. And another way that today is a good example that you can see how it queues execution is this mindfulness checkbox, which I actually missed doing today. You can see that this unchecked checkbox just kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. This is where it differs from these buttons here. So it nudges me even more in the direction of, hey, you haven't done this. So I will probably, once I finish filming, I will just sit down and just do some breathing exercise or something because I want to check that checkbox. So these are great, use them, and these are not all the checkboxes that I have, but these are actually the ones that define the flow of my day. This is why they're actually here instead of being just in the review section at the end of the day. These were the second queue that you can use in your system, and we have a few more to go. So let's move to queue number 3. A queue type number 3 we touched on slightly, and I would call these semantic action containers. What I mean by that is you saw what we did with the first block. We only created the overarching container for actions, but we could have put anything inside. The thing with these is that you can associate them with specific type of actions. For me, the first block is really about doing the hard things, doing my deep work sessions, doing the most important tasks that I have planned, pushing the key projects forward, etc. So while there is no habit that's been created just when I push the first block button, but to me that was very much a cue to start my deep work session. And of course, the more you repeat this pattern in your life where you only, let's say, do deep work in your first block of an execution day, the more reinforced that it becomes. The fourth cue that you can use is actually very simple, and these are just planned actions. You can see actually I don't have anything remaining to be done today, but if I was still having some items planned, you would see them here and they would definitely act as a queue. The reason I toggled this section is because I already checked that I don't have anything still planned for today. But if there was, I would obviously keep it untoggled, and that would bug the hell out of me if it was just sitting there. And these can be, these can be actions for some projects that you're having, or these can be routines as well. So let's say I actually happen to know that for tomorrow, I have my weekly digital reset and systems reset planned. So tomorrow I will see it in this section. And this is a routine that I happen to plan every week. And it doesn't belong to any project. It's just an ongoing routine that supports my systems domain of life, and it absolutely cues the execution because it just appears in this block regularly, and then I know I need to execute it. The fifth way and the fifth type of queue that is a little unusual, but I think to me it still matters a lot, and this is simply you creating a focus for the day. If we look here on the left, this input here is my focus for the day. It wasn't an action that I've planned, I didn't input an action in my action items database and planned it for today, but at the end of the day, I sit down and I just write 1, 2, maybe 3 items of what are the key things I need to execute absolutely. And this was what I wrote yesterday night. This is the video I'm working on right now, the habit loop video. And this is all that was needed actually, to plan my day. And this is beautiful. Sometimes these plans are very elaborate and they need a bunch of to-do items, etc. Sometimes this field can be just your top priority item, but then on top of that, you have a bunch of other things planned in your calendar and meetings, etc. And sometimes it's not. For me, actually, the most beautiful days are where I have just one single big item that I need to accomplish, and I simply work on that. And other than that, my calendar is clear. It's a small thing, and it's technically, obviously, super easy. It's just a text field. There is no crazy buttons or nested actions or anything like that. But to me, this is a very big execution queue. Once I scroll into this section, to me, this very much guides my execution. And together with other routines, like my deep work routine, I definitely work on the key focus for the day. So we've talked a lot about the queues, and here you can see, just to recap, this is the list of our 5 queue mechanisms in a Life OS that you can use. These are very important. Great queues don't just remind you, they pull you into motion, and they should also reduce the cost of starting. This structure should create inevitability. If you embed the cues correctly, the next step should become the only step. As always with Notion system reviews, you can take what works for you and disregard the rest, but I hope you found at least something useful. Let's move to the second stage of the habit cycle, and this is the actual routine, the thing that you execute. In the second stage, the key problem that we want to tackle is having to rely on our memory when it comes to executing our habits. We want to rely on our memory as little as possible. And also, sometimes people say, I have my habits written down. And my next question would be, well, written down where? Like in a note in your system somewhere that you look over like once in a blue moon? Or they're written down somewhere in a journal or maybe in your highlighted notes in a book? Like usually they're not immediately accessible to you right when you are actually executing the habit, which is the problem that we want to address. Because the idea is that routines shouldn't live in your head. They should live in your system where they're visible, editable, and actionable. Most systems and habits fail because of execution ambiguity. Once your execution of a habit was triggered by a cue, you shouldn't be wondering what to do. It just creates a lot of friction. You should immediately get a checklist. It's also about being able to easily change over time. So the maintenance of your system, how easy it is to adjust your routines to your changing needs. Or is it just a giant pain in the ass, and then when life changes, you just throw up your hands in the air and it takes more time to maintain the system than to adjust? That should never happen. It should be very easy to adjust the documentation for your habit right on the fly. So we'll discuss that as well. The very first way to ease execution is to have that checklist right inside of the action items. This is when you create the entire checklist for the routine with a macro button. Let's say our morning routine truly contains only these 4 items. And once I hit this button, it immediately created all these action items for me. I don't have to think about, well, morning routine, let me remember what's my morning routine. No, it's these 4 items. And just to show you a little bit of the internal structure of the button, you can see how it works in Notion. So maybe you can create ones for yourself. It's a macro button. It creates a bunch of actions. The way you can structure it, if you want to have a nested structure for the actions, is first you enable the actions to have sub-items. This way, every action would have a property called parent item and then a property called sub-items. And then that means here you can create a morning routine action as a first step. And then you can have all the sub-items created also as action, and then you set a parent item to the page that was added in the first step. So basically you have a morning routine as the first step, and then everything underneath you set a parent item to that page. This is how it works under the hood. And then we also tick a few checkboxes. We have our data entry and focus alignment. Those checkboxes are checked by the button itself. And here you can see that we're also attaching these actions to the day. We find the day where the start date is today in the days database. And then we add a bunch of actions that were created in these steps to that day. This is the entire structure of the button. More or less, other buttons work the same way. They may create more actions or less actions, but this is the exact structure. It may look a little confusing, but it's actually very straightforward. And especially once you create one button, the rest of them, they kind of work the same way. And then it's very easy to change, because if you want to change a button, let's say you want to remove a step or add a step, all you do is you really just duplicate a step, link it to a different routine. You see that it's referencing a routine, you add a different routine, and off you go, you're done. And by the way, if you want my help integrating this into your life, you can just click the link in the description. We can hop on a call and see where you're at and if I can help. But the key point to mention here is that each habit lives inside the system as a co-located definition and execution unit. What I mean by that is that it's not like I define my morning routine somewhere else in the system And then here I simply write down what it is that I do. The button is the definition of the routine. Every time I click it, I execute it, but also if I notice that something is off, that, oh, I've added another step to it that I just do every day, but haven't actually updated my system, or maybe that, what's more common is that you've defined that you want to do step X, but every time you execute it, you notice that you don't do it. In this case, you just delete this step, but of course, since the button holds that definition, it still creates every time. And every time you notice that, oh, I don't do this step, you are forced to adjust your habits. Now, if you've ever done a different approach where you write down your habits somewhere, maybe it's a note in your system somewhere, or God forbid, pen and paper, then the reality is almost always different, especially with time. And since that documentation for your habit, like the things that you should be executing, exists absolutely somewhere else, it just becomes stale. You forget to update it. You just start doing something different, and you are never prompted to, hey, like something has changed. Maybe like it's completely valid that your life has evolved and you need to update your habits. But either way, this collocation of the definition of the habit and its execution is precisely what allows you to quickly adjust the habits to the actual realities of your life. This is just super important. So now every time you notice that your execution deviates from the checklist, you can just instantly update the button right in place. And also get this, every button, you see a little red rectangle around it. That means that every button exists inside of a synced block. So every time I update anything inside of these buttons, it's immediately synced to the template that creates this daily cycle. So every time I update each of these buttons, the change is propagated to the template, and all the future days that will be created with the template will already have the new definition of my routines. Co-locating the definition and execution turns every habit into a living system. With macro buttons, you design what's supposed to happen, you make it one click away, and then you also make it easy to update in the future. Another concept that these buttons are perfect for is the whole idea of habit stacking, which is something you probably heard about, where you tack on a new habit right after a habit that you already have established. In these routines, you can easily imagine that it would be perfect for you to simply add another habit right after, let's say, focus alignment in this case. So you simply duplicate the step. Again, you reference another routine, and you're off to the races. Also related to the point of having fractal actions that are created by these macro buttons, I just want to mention how nice it is to have these containers exist on a high level, so you can easily see the high level structure of your day. This is super nice for reviews. Your day becomes a story with chapters, not just a whole slew of disconnected tasks. The second way of easing your execution is having that checklist in a form of macro buttons that exist inside of templates. If we look into my weekly digital reset, you can see that it already comes preloaded with specific suggestions for the sub actions. Now, none exist yet, so they're not created automatically. But if I move this item here, let's in fact do this. If I move it here, then you can see that there are no sub items. But if I open this and scroll, like I do this every time. Like I've done my weekly digital reset hundreds of times at this point. I've been doing this for years, and I still don't keep in mind the sequence. This is the whole point. Remembering works only for the most basic of routines. If you want to remember to brush your teeth before bed, fine. But something more complicated than that, you really want to have a checklist. So this is my checklist. And every time I see this, I drag it here, and then I open it, I scroll here, and I go through the list. I hit the button, And then you can see it appears here. This is one example. Pretty much for the weekly digital reset, I do all of these. But another option is you can have like a menu-based routine. If we look into my, let's say, morning training, you can see I have a bunch of macro buttons here. So this is quite different from the weekly digital reset where it's a step-by-step checklist that you want to follow. Here, I just click a macro button on a high level to create my morning like movement AM session. And then to me, it's just like a menu. What do I want to do today? It depends on your energy level, on what you've been doing for the last few days, how you feel, etc. Obviously, these are going to be different for you. This is not universal, but you can see how this can work. It's a trick that I picked up from reading the book called Elastic Habits, where it describes a matrix for your habits where you can vary the type of routine that you run and you vary the intensity depending on your energy level, and it gives you a lot of flexibility so you can just keep showing up. You check the overall checkbox of this is my movement AM block. Did I do it or not? Yes. But then what exactly you did underneath, like maybe you did some stretching, right? Maybe you did some zone 2 cardio, or maybe you just went for a walk. And for today, that's good, right? So this way you're not only building routines, you're training your system to think the way you do. Your system should incorporate that decision-making process. That will really drive compliance and consistency. As a fourth way to ease execution is just have a checklist inside of a template without creating an action. What I mean by that is, let's go to my weekly template. So this is the week I'm having right now, and it's not finished yet. But the point I wanted to show you is that I have a template for each week that, let's say in this case, describes the clarity and planning. And I have a brain reset action. Now, for this specific routine, I do have an action that also is planned every single week. But for these points underneath, I don't have specific actions created. They just all fall under doing my weekly brain reset. And I don't even have like specific actions created for reviewing my worry list. But since I open this page and I go through this template, every time I create a brain reset action, these definitely ease execution. And you can see that a lot in many other ways. Like you can have a template for some action that doesn't have sub actions or macro buttons that create sub actions, but instead of that just has a checklist, like a bunch of to-do items, and you simply check them. Now you kind of lose on the tracking aspect of it. I like creating actions because that creates an entry in the database that you can come back to, and you can have statistics of, let's say, you can see how many times in the year you've executed this specific routine. With simple template checklists, you don't have that, but sometimes it's fine. And I think this is one of the examples where it's fine. So just keep in mind, this is definitely a valid way to ease your execution if you have a consistent way of getting to that checklist. So these are your 3 ways to ease execution in your system. You can have fully generated fractal actions with all the sub actions defined. So that's your checklist. You can have macro buttons living inside of action templates, or you can simply have checklists living inside of any other template in your system that helps you with the execution of a routine. But make sure that checklist inside of that template is actually available when you're executing that routine. Let's move to the third section of the habit cycle, and this is the reward. This is the last stage and the one that actually closes the loop. Now, you can obviously reward yourself in many different ways, but specifically in the system, that would come with some kind of a scoring mechanism that you can actually then use as a feedback. And it's especially nice if you can have that habit reinforcement happen immediately. If you only see that feedback at the end of the day, it's much less effective. And also keep in mind that your system should reward the behavior itself and not the outcome. That's how you build consistency. The scoring in this system is based on the checkboxes, and checkboxes have 2 main representation layers or visualization layers. So you can see one here, it's our checkbox flow. We already talked about that. And also, if I scroll to the reflection section, this is something I look at the end of the day. This is the view when these checkboxes are grouped by domain of life. The difference here is that if we look at our checkbox flow, when it comes to reward, the main point here is that these are ordered and give a sense of progression, and the reward is kind of built into the sequence itself because each checkbox seems like a micro win. We like checking checkboxes. It's a visual progress bar, and it's really ideal for guiding execution and building this momentum of checking the checkboxes. But when it comes to domain-based grouping, it's slightly different. I already have a video about a detailed way of building a scoring system into your Life OS, so I'll link it here. But just to recap really quickly, once you are set on the habits that you want to include in your life, first step, you map them to checkboxes. The second step is you group them by domain. In this case, you can see we have life admin, clarity, nutrition, etc. Step number 3, you assign points to each habit. In that video, I go into the details of how you do it, but you decide this habit costs that many points and this habit costs that many points. And in the next step, you aggregate those scores per domain. You can see I have points for clarity, points for nutrition, points for fitness, etc. Since every checkbox has a specific number of points associated with it, I can easily aggregate it into a score for a domain in general. Next step is you set targets for each domain. This is what gives me this progress bar and percentage point. These are not percentage points of the maximum number of possible points that you can get, but instead it's a percentage of my target. And finally, the sort of last point is you are able to take all these scores for separate domains and aggregate them into a mastery score. This is actually what you were seeing all along in this field on the left. So when I execute some routines, I will immediately see this score go up. So just to demonstrate that, we can hit the wind down routine, and you can see actually inside of my wind down routine, I have a bunch of checkboxes that are being checked. So once I click it, you're going to see how many points I have added. You can see the percentage point for the day be bumped. And also you're going to see an action with a bunch of sub actions being created. So let's see how that happens. So here you go. Our score increased, the percentage increased, all these checkboxes were checked, and all these actions were generated. You can see it's got one level of nesting, and then we can also see another level of nesting. With a structure like this, you both get immediate reinforcement for the good habits that you do, but also when you review your day, you can see the whole picture by domain, and you're obviously motivated to check these checkboxes. Now, this really, together with the Masterpiece Day structure, just reinforces and teaches you that good structure equals good outcomes. With time, you will have this feedback loop of reviewing your days, and you will just clearly see that the days where you followed your Masterpiece Day structure and you've hit your targets, it inevitably is a good day. And since we have reviews and reflections at the end of the day where we actually set our performance and recovery, and we write a list of the highlights for the day and the pros and the cons, that together with weekly and monthly reviews will clearly show up patterns of you following this structure and having good days, or not following that structure and not having good days. This way, a great day stops being a mystery. Your system will show you exactly how it happened and how you can reproduce that in the future. And seeing these patterns is rewarding too, because seeing what works is how you build a life that works. So I think if you use all these tools with the scoring and with the optimization of each section and stage of the habit loop, you have all the right tools to really remove as much friction from your habits as you can possibly remove. Your system will become a very reliable bridge between you knowing what to do and actually doing it. So build in the right loops and you won't need that much motivation. This was just a small part of the overall fundamental mastery system, and next I suggest you learn about an organized and consistent way of aggregating all this data into higher level timeframes like weeks, months, quarters, and reviewing it. So watch this video to learn that next.